Hello. Today we're going to talk about branching within controlled structures in Java. So we have talked about it till now, decision controlled structures, repetition controlled structures, and now we're going to talk about within any one of those controlled structures if we can do something called branching. Can we modify that controlled structure? Um, Branching basically allows us to redirect the flow of program execution. So we have statement 1, statement 2, statement 3 within a controlled structure, say, if, for, whatever. um, we don't want to execute the whole block of statements. We just say, for example, give me a second, we want to execute only the first two statements, and we're going to branch out and get out of the loop after two statements in some situations. Other situations, maybe we want to execute only the first statement, and then we want to re-enter this loop and execute all three statements again. So how do we do all this complex logic is where branching statements come into place. And Java offers three branch mechanism within control structures. First one is break. This is missing semicolon here. Second one is continue, and the third one is the return statement, which you might have heard of already, and break and continue might be something new. So if you look at Java tutorial by Sunil, they're referred as just plain branching statement. They used to override normal loop logic, and my recommendation would be use them judiciously. If you're using branching statements too many times, it might be indication that your program logic might have some flaws in it, and it may be you can better deal with it by restructuring your program logic. So if you find yourself, you're using a lot of breaks and continues within loops in the program you're writing, I would say that that's a red flag. Like, that means that you need to reevaluate your logic and see if we can simplify that. Because there are some situations I agree where we have to use these statements, and that's the only way. But a lot of times we can do without these branching statements. With that said, let's look at some some code examples of these branching statements. Here we have something called not only we have the branching statement, we have something called named branching statements. So what are named branching statements? They're basically we're going to use some branching statements, but besides that we are using names for our loops. This for loop, which goes from here to here, is we have assigned it a name outer loop, and this is the coding syntax. You name it something, and you have two semicolons, and then the loop after that, the block of code, which is a loop, can be referred using this named statement. I mean, I would discourage you from using it too often, but it can be a good way to organize your code. Here I have another named loop called inner loop. I've named this the second for loop, which goes from here all the way till here as the inner loop. Now we are having two nested loop, and if this condition, which is I plus j mod 5, remember mod operator we learned about, which is a remainder operator, we're going to add I and j. So in the first time the loops run, I is equals 0 and j equals 0. So for 0 mod 5, when 0 is divided by 5, what is the remainder? Since there's nothing to divide, the remainder is probably going to be 5, so it's not equal to 0, so we're not going to execute this. But eventually, when either this one is 2 and this one is 3, we will encounter a scenario where I plus j equals 5. In that case, when I plus j is 5, Um, and when you mod that with 5, we're going to get 0. This statement will at that point would become true, and this continue short circuit statement will execute. It will basically mean when this happens, we will exit out of this inner loop, which goes from here to here, and the control will go back to the outer loop, and we will not execute any of this print line statement. So here we see we are we have seen the use of a branching statement called continue. Even though this is a whole block of statements, we have told the system to ignore the next two statements when you encounter a special condition, and control goes back to the outer loop. So we have also learned in this video about named loops. We can name a block of statement, like here we have named outer loop and an inner loop, and that can help us to execute named branching. Another way of branching would be to just do, continue. Let's see. We could have just done continue statement. If we had done something like this, we would have ignored these two statements, but the control would have gone back to the inner loop, to the default loop we are within. But because we were saying go to outer loop earlier, the control was going back to actually the named outer loop. So we see how we can use continue statements, named loops, and named branching statements. Another branching statement which is used very often is the break statement. You see break over here. Then this can be used within any loop structure, and it breaks out of the first loop. If there are multiple loops, it helps you break out of the first loop structure. So maybe we're running a loop for here. We're running a loop 10 times, and under a special scenario when I equals 5, if that ever happens, we don't want to run any subsequent statements. Here this system.out print line statement, and we want to break out of it, and that's what the break enables. And when we do a break, the control goes directly to the first line after the loop ends. So with this, I hope you guys have a better understanding of branching within control structures, of break and continue statements. And most of you might already be familiar with return statements. Return statement is basically when we return a value of a method or a program. I've seen something like, return 5 if the method's return type is integer. And instead of a break statement, if this was not a driver class but a method, we could have had a return statement if we have the answer to a solution over here, and we could have returned that value. So with that, I hope you guys will be able to use some branching logic in your future programming assignments.